Admiral Threlkaz had made the same offer 3 times now, and 3 times the answer had come back exactly the same, delivered in the same flat, unhurried voice, as if the garrison commander found the question mildly tedious rather than existential. "This is Major Callan Vess, Kestrel Hold Garrison. Offer declined. Anything else, Admiral?" Kaz stood on the command deck of the Vrain Dominion flagship Ash Sovereign, staring down at the small, battered relay station turning slowly beneath his fleet, and tried, for the 3rd time, to understand what he was looking at. By any calculation that mattered, Kestrel Hold should already have fallen. It was a mid-sized deep space relay and mining platform, garrisoned by fewer than 60 human soldiers, its outer defense grid reduced to scrap in the opening hours of the bombardment, its shield generators running, according to his own sensor officers, on power reserves that should have failed 2 days ago. He had 11 capital ships in orbit. He had 3 full assault companies staged and ready. He had, by every reasonable military calculation available to him, already won this engagement. And yet the garrison held. "Run the numbers again," Kaz said, not looking away from the station. "Tell me I'm wrong about their reserves." His tactical officer, a precise, methodical Vrain named Senis Odar, did not need to run the numbers again. He had run them 6 times already, each time returning the same answer. "Their shield generator should have failed at least 40 hours ago, Admiral, based on standard capacity models. It has not. Either their engineers have found a method of power conservation that isn't in any of our intelligence files, or the models we're using for human technology are wrong." "Or both." "Or both," Odar agreed. Kaz turned away from the viewport, pacing the length of the command deck, with the restless energy of a man trying to solve a problem that refused to behave the way problems were supposed to behave. "They have no reinforcement fleet within range," he said. "Our long-range scans confirm it. The nearest human battle group is 11 days out, and even if it were closer, it couldn't break a blockade this size without reinforcements of its own that don't exist yet. Their supply lines are cut, their shield is failing, their garrison is outnumbered roughly 40-1 and has been since the 3rd day of this siege." He stopped, facing the viewport again. "They know all of this. Major Vess has access to the same strategic realities I do. And still, every time I offer terms that would let his people walk away alive, he refuses within seconds, as if the offer costs him nothing to decline." "Perhaps he believes reinforcements are coming after all," Odar offered. "I don't think he does," Kaz said quietly. "I think that's what troubles me most." Inside Kestrel Hold, 70 meters below the station's cratered outer hull, Major Callan Vess sat in what remained of the garrison's command center, listening to the low, constant groan of a structure that had taken far more punishment than it had ever been designed to survive. Sergeant Iris Duval, the garrison's chief medic, and by virtue of attrition rather than rank, its de facto second-in-command, crouched beside the main power console, coaxing another few hours of stability out of a shield generator that had been running on emergency bypass for 2 days straight. "That's the 3rd surrender offer," she said, without looking up from her work. "You know he's going to keep asking." "I know. You know we don't actually have a strategic reason to keep saying no, not when we could put in an after-action report and have it make sense to anyone reading it later." "I know that too." Duval finally looked up, exhaustion etched into every line of her face, the particular hollow-eyed look of someone who had spent 4 straight days treating wounded in a facility that had run out of most of its proper medical supplies on day 2. "Then talk me through it again, because I've got 11 wounded in the lower bay who deserve to know if the reason we're all still bleeding down here actually holds up." Vess didn't answer immediately. He crossed to the station's damaged tactical display instead, a cracked, flickering screen that still, somehow, managed to show the one piece of information that mattered more than any of the 11 Dominion warships currently in orbit above them. A single, slow-moving transponder signal, crawling across the display at a speed that felt, most days, unbearably close to standing still. "The Havorson convoy," he said, 4 evacuation transports, carrying just under 9,000 civilians out of the Meridian system, currently 3 days from reaching safe jump range. They can't jump early. Their drives aren't rated for it, not fully loaded, not without risking a catastrophic failure that would kill everyone aboard. They need 3 more days at their current speed, minimum, before they're clear enough to make the jump safely. And the Dominion fleet. is currently sitting directly between the Havorson convoy's current position and the jump corridor they need to reach. If Kaz breaks off the siege early to pursue easier targets, or redirects even a fraction of his fleet toward known evacuation routes once he realizes Kestrel Hold isn't worth the resources it's costing him, he finds that convoy in under 6 hours, unescorted, unarmed, 9,000 civilians, sergeant, and nothing standing between them and a fleet with nothing better to do. Duval was quiet for a long moment, the low hum of failing systems filling the space where her next question should have been. So we're not holding Kestrel Hold because we think we can win it. No. We're holding it because every hour we keep his attention here is an hour he's not spending finding that convoy. Yes. And when the shield finally fails, when we run out of whatever miracle you and Chief Osa have been running on for the last 2 days, what happens to us? Vess looked at the crawling transponder signal a moment longer before he answered. I don't know, he said honestly. I know what happens to the convoy if we stop before they're clear. I'm less certain what happens to us either way. I've decided I can live with the first uncertainty. I'm working on the second one. Duval didn't say anything else for a while. She went back to the console instead, coaxing another hour of stability out of a system that had already given far more than it should have been able to, and Vess understood, watching her work, that she hadn't needed a better answer than the one he'd already given her. She needed to hear him say it plainly, once, so that whatever came next, she'd know exactly what she was bleeding for. 2 decks below, in what remained of the garrison's makeshift armory, Chief Petty Officer Ren Asafo was performing the kind of quiet, unglamorous miracle that had kept Kestrel Hold's shield generator running 2 full days past its rated failure point. He'd spent the better part of 30 years in engine rooms and power relay stations, long enough to develop an instinct for machinery that no manual could fully teach, and he'd spent the last 4 days applying every scrap of that instinct to a generator that, by any conventional measure, should have died on the second day of the siege. You keep talking to it like it can hear you, said Private Mika Sato, the 18-year-old technician's assistant who'd been shadowing Asafo since the fighting started, mostly because there was nowhere else for a technician's assistant to be useful anymore. Maybe it can, Asafo said, not looking up from the exposed relay coil he was carefully rewrapping with salvaged insulation. Machines like this run this hard, this long past what they're rated for. They start doing things the manual doesn't explain. I've stopped assuming I understand exactly why it's still running. I've started just being grateful it is. How much longer can you keep it going? Asafo considered the question with the same careful attention he gave everything, running a mental tally of every patch, bypass, and improvised repair currently holding the generator together. Long as the major needs, near as I can manage. After that, we'll find out together. Sato didn't ask any further questions. She simply handed him the next tool he needed before he had to ask for it, and the two of them kept working, deck after deck below a command center, where a man they trusted was doing math neither of them could see, on a clock they'd decided, without ever being told the reason, was worth everything they had left to give it. The 4th surrender offer came 2 hours later, delivered not by Admiral Kaz himself this time, but by a Dominion emissary named Solon Cray, transmitted directly to the garrison's remaining communications array with the kind of careful, formal phrasing that suggested someone above Kaz's pay grade had started paying attention to a siege that should never have lasted this long. Major Vess, I am authorized by Admiral Kaz to offer significantly improved terms. Full evacuation of your remaining garrison, safe conduct guaranteed under Dominion honor codes, medical treatment for your wounded, and formal acknowledgement of your defense as a legitimate military engagement rather than a hopeless last stand. In exchange, we ask only that you cease resistance and allow our forces to secure the station intact. I would ask you to consider this offer seriously, Major. The alternative outcome, should you continue to refuse, will not be kind to your people. Vess considered the offer for exactly as long as it took him to glance once more at the crawling transponder signal on the tactical display, now showing just under 2 days and 11 hours remaining before the Havorson convoy reached safe jump range. Emissary Cray, he said, keying the response channel, I appreciate the improved terms. I want you to understand that my answer isn't a reflection of doubting your admiral's honor or believing the terms aren't genuine. I believe they probably are. He paused. The answer is still no. There was a silence on the other end long enough that Vess wondered if the channel had dropped. May I ask why, Major? Genuinely, not as a tactic. I find myself curious in a way my position rarely allows. Vess thought about it for a moment, weighing how much to say, and decided in the end that there was very little left to lose by being honest. Because the moment I say yes, Admiral Kaz's fleet becomes available for something other than sitting in orbit above a relay station that isn't actually worth what it's costing him to take. And there's somewhere else that fleet becoming available would be a very bad thing for a lot of people who can't defend themselves the way we can. I can't tell you where. I can tell you that every hour you spend here instead of there is an hour I'm willing to pay quite a lot for. Another long pause. You're telling me this station isn't the objective. I'm telling you I have a reason for saying no that has nothing to do with whether I think we can win here. We can't. I know that. My people know that. We're saying no anyway, because the value of this station was never really about the station. The channel went quiet and stayed quiet for the rest of the hour, and Vess allowed himself the smallest, grimmest satisfaction of knowing that somewhere aboard the Ash Sovereign, an emissary was almost certainly relaying a very confusing report to an admiral who had started this siege expecting a straightforward, if stubborn, military engagement, and was instead finding something his own doctrine had no clean category for. Admiral Kaz received Emissary Kray's report in silence, reading it twice before setting it aside. He told you it isn't about the station, Kaz said finally. He did, Admiral. I do not believe he was attempting to deceive me. His tone throughout the exchange suggested a man stating a fact he expected me to find useful, not a man attempting a bluff. Then he's telling us there's something else, something we're not seeing. Kaz turned to his tactical officer. Odar, pull every long-range sensor sweep we've run since the siege began, every civilian transponder signature, every merchant convoy, every evacuation route within 6 hours of our current position. I want to know what a garrison commander thinks is worth dying for that isn't the station directly beneath my fleet. It took Odar the better part of 2 hours to compile the data, cross-referencing traffic patterns against known evacuation corridors, and when he finally returned to the command deck, his expression carried the particular stillness of an officer who had found an answer he wasn't entirely comfortable delivering. The Havorson convoy, Admiral. 4 evacuation transports, approximately 9,000 civilian passengers, currently transiting toward a jump corridor roughly 6 hours from our present position, assuming we broke off the siege and moved to intercept immediately. Kaz stared at the projected route for a long moment, the pieces settling into place with the particular, uncomfortable clarity of a puzzle he wished had resolved into something simpler. He's not defending a relay station, Kaz said quietly. He's defending a schedule. It would appear so, Admiral. 60 soldiers, an obsolete shield generator, and a supply of stubbornness I still don't fully understand, standing between my entire fleet and an unescorted evacuation convoy he has no way of directly protecting, because the only thing he actually can do is make certain I'm not paying attention to it. That would explain the refusal pattern, Admiral. Each offer we extend represents an opportunity for him to end the engagement on favorable terms. Each refusal represents, functionally, a bet that keeping our attention fixed here is worth more than his own survival. Kaz was quiet for a long time, staring at the small, battered shape of Kestrel Hold turning below his fleet, a station he could have reduced to rubble at any point in the last 4 days had destroying it actually been the objective, rather than the slow, grinding process of trying to take it intact and force a surrender that, he now understood, had never actually been on the table. How long until the convoy reaches safe jump range? He asked finally. Sensor extrapolation suggests approximately 51 hours, Admiral, assuming no further delays. And how long can Kestrel Hold's shield generator realistically hold, by your own most recent assessment? Odar hesitated before answering. Honestly, Admiral, I don't know. It should have failed days ago. I no longer trust my own models to predict when it actually will. Kaz turned away from the viewport, something working behind his eyes that Odar had rarely seen there in the years he'd served under him. Then I suppose, Kaz said quietly, we're about to find out exactly how much a 60-person garrison is willing to pay for 51 hours. The assault that followed was the heaviest the garrison had faced since the siege began. 3 full companies committed simultaneously against a station whose outer defenses had been ground down to almost nothing days earlier. Vess coordinated the defense from what remained of the command center, watching his tactical display fragment into a chaos of red markers as Dominion forces breached the outer hull in 4 separate locations within the first 20 minutes. We can't hold 4 breach points with what we've got, Duval said, voice tight, moving between the console and the makeshift medical station they'd set up in the corner of the same room, because there was no longer a functioning separate facility to send the wounded to. Corporal Ashwin's team is already down to 6 effective soldiers at Breach Point 2. Pull them back to the secondary corridor. Let Breach Point 2 collapse in on itself. We don't need to hold every inch of this station, Sergeant. We need to hold long enough. Long enough for what exactly? You never actually finished that math for me. 49 hours, Vess said, not looking away from the display. That's what's left on the convoy's clock as of 6 minutes ago. I don't need to hold Kestrel hold intact. I need Admiral Kaz's attention fixed on taking it. Instead of on the 6-hour window, it would take him to break off and go hunting somewhere else. The fighting that followed was close, brutal, and largely unglamorous, corridor by corridor, bulkhead by bulkhead, a garrison of exhausted soldiers trading ground for time in a calculation that had nothing to do with holding the station and everything to do with making its capture cost more than it was worth, for as long as possible. At Breach Point 3, a narrow maintenance corridor that had become, almost by accident, one of the garrison's most stubbornly held positions, a young corporal named Ren Ashwin found herself commanding the last 6 effective soldiers of what had, 4 days earlier, been a full 16-person squad. She hadn't expected the command. She'd been the squad's demolitions specialist, not its ranking officer, until an artillery strike on the second day had removed every soldier senior to her from the equation entirely. They're going to push again in about 10 minutes, she said, checking the charge on her weapon with hands that had long since stopped shaking, exhaustion having worn the fear down into something flatter and more manageable. Same as the last 4 times. And we hold the same as the last 4 times, said Private Dane Aquiosa, the squad's youngest surviving member, barely out of basic training when the siege began. Corporal, can I ask you something? Make it quick. Do you think the Major's right about the convoy? About all of this actually meaning something? Ashwin considered the question while she checked the corridor's remaining defensive charges, buying herself a moment before she answered. I think it doesn't matter whether I believe it, she said finally. I think the Major believes it enough for all of us, and my job right now isn't to have faith. It's to hold this corridor for 10 more minutes so his math has time to work. Whatever happens after that, I'll believe it when I see the confirmation come through, same as everybody else. That's not really an answer. It's the only one I've got time for. Positions, everyone. They're coming. The breach point held for another 6 hours before finally collapsing, Ashwin and 3 of her remaining soldiers falling back through a service corridor half a second before a final Dominion push overran the position entirely, carrying with them nothing but their weapons, their wounded, and the 6 additional hours their stand had bought against a clock none of them could see, but all of them had chosen to trust. By the end of the assault's 6th hour, the garrison had been pushed back to less than a third of Kestrel Hold's original footprint, consolidated into the station's central core, a defensible knot of corridors and bulkheads that Vess had, almost from the first day of the siege, quietly identified as the position he intended to die defending if it came to that. It was starting to look like it might. Admiral Kaz watched the assault's progress from the Ash Sovereign's command deck with a growing, uncomfortable sense that he was witnessing something his own military education had never adequately prepared him to understand. Casualty estimates, garrison side, he said. Difficult to confirm precisely, Admiral, given the chaos of close-quarters engagement, but our forward units estimate the garrison has taken losses in excess of 60% of their original strength. Odar paused. They are still fighting, Admiral. Every consolidated position has required a full, contested breach. None have simply been abandoned. 60% losses, and they're still fighting for corridors that no longer connect to anything strategically meaningful. It would appear the garrison's objective was never the corridors themselves, Admiral, merely the time required to contest them. Kaz absorbed that in silence, watching the tactical projection of Kestrel Hold's interior, a station reduced now to a single defended core surrounded by Dominion forces on every side, and found himself, for the first time in a long and largely unremarkable career, genuinely uncertain what victory in this engagement was actually going to feel like once he achieved it. Send word to the assault commanders, he said finally. Offer the defenders in the Central Core one final opportunity to surrender before we commit to a full breach. I want it on record that the offer was made, and I want it made clear that this is the last one. Understood, Admiral, though given the pattern of previous responses. I'm aware of the pattern, Odar. I want the offer made anyway. The final offer reached Vess through a channel that had grown increasingly unstable over the last several hours, static-choked and fragmentary, but clear enough to carry its meaning. Major Vess, this is Admiral Kaz speaking directly this time. Your garrison has fought with a degree of resolve I did not anticipate and, I will admit, do not fully understand. I am offering final terms. Surrender your remaining position now, and I will personally guarantee the safety and honorable treatment of every surviving soldier under your command. I am not asking you to explain your reasoning to me a second time. I am simply asking you to consider whether the cost you have already paid is enough. Vess looked around the cramped, damaged space that remained of his command center. Of the original 58 soldiers under his command, he had, by the last count Duval had managed before the medical station's tracking systems finally failed, perhaps 19 still capable of fighting. The wounded numbered more than that, crowded into every available corner of the Corps, kept alive by medical staff running on stimulants and stubbornness in roughly equal measure. He checked the tactical display one final time. 43 hours remained on the convoy's clock. Admiral Kaz, he said, keying the channel, I appreciate the offer, and I believe you mean it honestly. My answer is still no. I'd like to explain why this time since you asked. I'm listening, Major. You spent 4 days assuming this siege was about Kestrel Hold. It never was. It was about a convoy carrying 9,000 civilians that your fleet would have found and destroyed within 6 hours if I'd surrendered on day one. I don't expect you to feel good about that math, Admiral. I don't feel good about it either. But every hour my people have bled for this station is an hour that convoy got closer to a jump corridor your fleet can't follow them through. We have 43 hours left on that clock. I intend to spend every one of them making sure your attention stays exactly where it's been for the last 4 days. The silence that followed was the longest yet. You would let your entire garrison die, Kaz said finally, for a convoy you will never meet, carrying people you will never know, on the strength of nothing but a calculation that the trade is worth making. Yes. Why? Vess considered the question for a long moment, aware of Duval watching him from across the room, aware of 19 exhausted soldiers and dozens of wounded who had all, in their own way, made the same calculation he had and kept fighting anyway. Because somebody has to be willing to be the reason it works, he said. Somebody has to hold the line long enough for the people who can't hold it themselves. I don't get to know if it was worth it, Admiral. None of us do. We just have to decide before the fighting starts whether we're willing to pay the price without ever finding out. My garrison decided that 4 days ago. We haven't changed our mind since. Kaz did not respond immediately. He sat with the words for a long time, longer than protocol strictly allowed, staring at the tactical display showing a battered, encircled station that had cost him, by his own quartermaster's grim accounting, more resources and more casualties than any single engagement of the campaign so far, all to take a position that had never, according to its own commander, actually been the point. Odar, he said finally, recalculate the intercept window for the Havorson convoy, assuming we break off this siege in the next hour. Admiral, do it. The numbers came back within minutes, even breaking off immediately, redirecting the fleet at maximum sustainable speed. The convoy would reach safe jump range with roughly 6 hours to spare before Dominion forces could possibly intercept. Kaz studied the numbers for a long time. They were always going to make it, he said quietly, weren't they, even if I'd broken off on day one? It is difficult to say with certainty, Admiral. The margins have narrowed considerably as the siege progressed. Major Vess could not have known, with confidence, precisely how much margin his defense was actually buying. He made his calculations with the information available to him at the time, which suggested the margin was considerably tighter than it turned out to be. He gambled his entire garrison on a calculation he couldn't verify. Yes, Admiral. And he was willing to lose that gamble completely, rather than risk being wrong in the other direction. Kaz turned away from the display, pacing the length of the command deck once more, and when he finally spoke again, his voice had lost the hard, clipped precision it had carried through most of the siege. Order the assault forces to hold position, he said. No further breach attempts. Open a channel to Major Vess. Admiral, our forces hold an overwhelming tactical advantage. A final breach would almost certainly. I am aware of our tactical advantage, Odar. I am ordering you to hold position anyway. The channel opened a final time, and Vess, exhausted, expecting another offer he intended to refuse for the 5th time, was surprised by what came through instead. Major Vess, I am ordering my forces to stand down, effective immediately. Vess said nothing for a long moment, certain he had misheard. Say again, Admiral. I said stand down. Your convoy, by my own tactical officer's calculations, would have reached safe jump range regardless of how this siege concluded. You paid a price you did not need to pay, Major, for a margin that turned out wider than you had any way of knowing. A pause. I find, having learned that I no longer have any interest in collecting the rest of the price you were prepared to offer. Vess closed his eyes briefly, the weight of 4 days settling into his chest all at once, the particular exhaustion of a man who had spent every hour since the siege began fully prepared to die and was now being asked to absorb the possibility that he might not have to. Admiral, I don't fully understand. Neither do I, Major, if I'm honest. I have spent 4 days trying to understand a garrison commander willing to sacrifice 60 soldiers for a convoy he could not see, could not communicate with, and had no guarantee would ever know his name. I do not believe my own doctrine has adequate language for what you did here. I am not certain it needs to. I only know that I am no longer willing to spend more of my fleet's resources, or your people's remaining lives, taking a station whose only real value has already been spent. Another pause, longer this time. You may keep what remains of Kestrel hold, Major. I am withdrawing my forces. The channel went silent, and for a long moment, nobody in the ruined command center said anything at all. Duval was the first to break it, her voice rough with 4 days of exhaustion and something that might, under different circumstances, have been disbelief. He's just leaving. It appears so, Vess said, still staring at the now empty tactical display, where 11 Dominion warships had spent 4 days orbiting a station he'd never actually expected to walk away from. Why? Vess thought about it for a moment, watching through the station's remaining viewport as the first of the Ash Sovereign's escort ships began, slowly and unmistakably, to break formation and withdraw. I think, he said finally, he ran the numbers on what we were willing to pay and decided he didn't actually want to be the one who collected it. The Havorson convoy reached safe jump range 31 hours later, 9,000 civilians completing a transit that none of them would ever know had been quietly, desperately defended by 60 soldiers on a relay station most of them had never heard of and would never visit. Major Vess received confirmation of the successful jump through a relay message forwarded from Fleet Command 4 days after that, by which point Kestrel holds surviving garrison, 19 combat effective and 22 wounded, had been fully evacuated to a proper medical facility, their improvised command center finally, mercifully, allowed to go quiet. Vess read the confirmation message twice before setting it down, and found, to his own mild surprise, that he didn't feel the relief he'd expected to feel. He felt something closer to grief, for the 37 soldiers who hadn't survived to read it themselves, who had made the same calculation he had, and paid the full price of it without ever finding out whether the gamble had actually been necessary. Duval found him there a while later, in the quiet, sterile calm of a proper medical bay for the first time in nearly a week. You did the math again, she said. It wasn't a question. I did. And Kaz's tactical officer was right. Even if we'd surrendered on day one, the convoy probably would have made it. Probably, not certainly. There's a margin in there I still can't fully close, a window where if the fleet had moved faster or the convoy had moved slower, 37 people died for nothing. Duval sat down beside him, quiet for a long moment. Or 37 people died for a margin that turned out to be wider than any of us could have known in advance, because we made sure it was. That's the generous version. It's also the honest one. You didn't have the numbers Kaz had access to afterward. You had the numbers available at the time, and at the time, every calculation said the margin was razor thin. You didn't gamble recklessly, Major. You gambled with the best information you had, on the side of caution that cost you the most if you were wrong. Vess was quiet for a long time, watching the slow, steady rhythm of a medical monitor tracking one of the garrison's more severely wounded soldiers, a young corporal who would, according to the attending physician, make a full recovery. I keep thinking about what Kaz said, he admitted finally, that his own doctrine didn't have language for it. I've been trying to figure out what language I'd use instead, and I don't think I have one either. I don't think it's really about strategy at all in the end. It's just a decision. You decide before anyone starts shooting whether you're willing to be the reason it works, without ever getting to find out for certain if it mattered. And if you'd known, going in, that the margin was wider than you thought, would you have made a different call? Vess considered that honestly, for longer than the question probably deserved. No, he said finally, I don't think I would have. I think you make the call assuming the worst version of the math is true, because the cost of being wrong in the other direction is a convoy that doesn't make it. I'd rather have 37 names I have to carry, and know I did everything the worst version of that math demanded, than find out afterward I'd held something back, because I was hoping the numbers would be kinder than they looked. Kestrel Hold was formally decommissioned 6 months later, its remaining structure too damaged to justify the cost of repair, its strategic value, such as it had ever really been, permanently superseded by newer relay infrastructure built elsewhere along the border. Nobody objected to the decommissioning. It had never, in the end, been about the station at all. What remained instead was a small, unremarkable memorial plaque, installed at Fleet Command's main garrison depot at Major Vess's own request, listing 37 names and a single line of text beneath them, chosen after considerable deliberation and meant, he'd explained to the officer overseeing its installation, not as a tribute to a battle won, but as an honest record of a debt paid in full, by people who never got to confirm whether the payment had actually been necessary. They held the line so someone else's clock could run out. Admiral Threlkaz, for his part, filed an official after-action report on the Kestrel Hold engagement that deviated, in several notable respects, from standard Dominion military doctrine, including a lengthy addendum on what he termed sacrifice calculus warfare, a phenomenon his own service's tactical manuals had never adequately addressed, in which an outnumbered force chooses to accept near-certain destruction not to achieve victory, but to purchase time whose value cannot be verified until long after the cost has already been paid. The addendum was, by most accounts within the Dominion's officer corps, considered a curiosity rather than a serious doctrinal contribution, the kind of report filed and largely forgotten, one admiral's attempt to make sense of an engagement his own training had never prepared him to understand. Kaz kept a copy of it anyway, in his personal effects, long after his active service ended, alongside a single line he'd added to the very end of the report, one that had never made it into any official record, because he had written it for no audience but himself. I do not know if I would have made the same choice, in his position. I have spent considerable time since Kestrel Hold trying to decide whether that uncertainty troubles me, because I believe the choice was wrong, or because some part of me suspects it was right, and I am not certain I possess whatever it was that allowed Major Vess to make it anyway. The Havorson convoy's 9,000 civilians resettled, over the following years, across a dozen different systems, most of them never learning the full details of what had bought their passage to safety, a single relay station's worth of stubbornness standing, however briefly, between them and a fleet that had every advantage except the one that mattered most. The willingness to pay a price nobody could guarantee would be worth paying, and to pay it anyway, because somebody had to be the reason it worked.